Hey, well, welcome to Resonate, everyone. This is a show exploring the cultural moment that we find ourselves in and the changing landscape of church, mission, and discipleship. And today I'm talking with my good friend Ian King about the new thing that God is doing. Ian is a leader of leaders, a pastor of Restore Community Church, which is a multi-site church of 5 locations, is it, around Northeast London? Is that right, Ian? About 5 locations you've got?
That is right, or 5 expressions of church. Anyway.
5 expressions, yeah. Ian's part of the steering leadership of Reach London, the group of friends that helped me launch the initiative that produces this show and catalyses a variety of leadership conversations. And as we've been journeying together, we've both been seeing the beginnings of a fresh outpouring. We've both been observing that the next generation is searching for authenticity and something true and real, small rather than just large, something with intentional spiritual practices and shared life community. And we'll discuss this generational shift from sons to being fathers and spiritual parents, mums and dads. So, talking about our generation taking up a slightly different role. We'll hear Ian's journey of coming back from the brink of burnout, how to recognize some of the signs and how to deal successfully with the challenges. I've watched Ian navigate so much change with so much grace, and I'm just looking forward to hearing more about his story on that front. I think we'll learn a lot from him. We'll explore the challenges of inclusivity and the need to focus on posture rather than position on issues. And I just really want to thank you for joining us, Ian. So welcome.
It's a privilege, Phil. I'm sure we'll have a fun conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you kind of threw a whole load of subjects my way, and I went, yes, I want to talk about all of those. So well done. And I'm sure our listeners do as well. So you're also, I believe, the newly appointed leader of New Thing Europe. Is that right?
Well, in waiting anyway.
Waiting.
Yes, we're going to begin to transition towards that, over the next couple of months. So, yeah.
Okay. So tell me a little bit what New Thing is.
New Thing is a global organisation, actually, which is a catalyst for church planting around the world. I think if probably most people are aware, the most effective means of reaching unbelievers for Jesus is church planting. So newly planted church have a much higher reach. I think it's something like 4 times more effective in terms of reaching people who don't know Jesus yet. And so we've been on a journey the last few years as Restore in terms of church planting. But also we connected relationally with New Thing, which have got some of the tools for helping come alongside and helping people to dream about how they might church plant and then create a kind of strategy towards that. And so we've been really helped by New Thing. And as part of that, we have become a part of New Thing and then are beginning to help advise other churches in terms of how some of the mistakes we made and how they can avoid some of those, and hopefully be inspired by some of the wins from it as well. So that's very exciting.
Brilliant. Yeah, what I love about Ian is your ability to dream big and just to value the small. You have an amazing ability to adapt to change and to network relationally. I think we're going to be doing a lot more collaborating between Reach London and New Thing in the years ahead. I'm looking forward to that. So, Ian, tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get to be doing what you're doing? What's your early story? How did you come to faith?
Okay. My early story, I grew up in a non-Christian home. Both my mom and dad kind of had historic faith experiences, but by the time I came along, they were not active in any church life. So I grew up with no real understanding of Jesus or experience of church, really. The only time we ever used to go to church, my dad was from Cornwall, and we used to go on holiday every year to Cornwall. And Cornwall was obviously historically Methodist territory. And when we went on holiday to Cornwall, we used to stay with family. And as a part of that, we used to go to the local Methodist chapel, which was a dying chapel in the middle of nowhere. So it wasn't a particularly positive experience for 3 boys growing up. So I didn't grow up with a particularly positive perspective on faith, really. And then I went away to university and I was studying economics. And one of my friends on my course was a really switched on, spirit filled follower of Jesus. And I'd never met anybody like him before, because there was a real light that shone from him, and everyone loved him and wanted to be around him. And as I got to know him a bit more, increasingly he shared that it was Jesus that made a difference to him. And to begin with, that didn't make any sense to me, because my only experience of faith background, or I'm sorry to say, people from faith backgrounds, was they seemed to be quite boring, and it didn't seem to be living life in all its fullness. And so it kind of, I couldn't quite compute what it was that made this guy different. And so he began to talk to me about Jesus and tell me some of the stories from the Gospels and into Acts, which was a very different understanding of what Jesus was like. So I remember him preaching off John 10:10 to me in terms of Jesus coming and saying, I've come to give you life, and life in all its fullness. And in the end, I think I just sat down one day in my room and I thought, well, if that is true, then that sounds like a better way to live. So I invited Jesus into my life, and everything really started to change from there. In the next period of time, got filled with the Holy Spirit, connected to a church that actually, it was a new church plant, and they baptized 200 people in their first 2 years of existence.
Wow.
Which was phenomenal. Yeah. It was the first charismatic church really in Cambridge, and they didn't have, they had a reasonable number of students, but actually it was mainly people from the community that they saw get saved. And they really saw a snowball impact. And so that was a great experience to be birthed into. Yeah. And I think by the time I left uni, I knew that at some point I went to work in the city and worked for BP for 3 years in the City of London. But I think I knew by the time I came to London that I wasn't going to stay doing that full time. It was like something had snapped within my heart, and I knew at some point I was going to end up in full-time ministry for Jesus. And I did that 1989, which is now sounding like a long time ago. And I've been full-time ministry since then.
Yeah, and it's been amazing because I've tracked most of your time over the years in different places in leadership, and you have just modeled resilience and flexibility and friendship in such a tremendous way, and it's been an inspiration to watch you and Christine map your way through ministry over the years.
You're very kind, Phil.
No, I'm not. I'm just being absolutely honest. It's what you do, Ian. One of the things we've both been seeing is this beginning of a fresh outpouring, isn't it? This next generation. Certainly we saw it when we were younger leaders, but there's something fresh happening, kicking in this generation, isn't it? Do you want to share a little bit about what you're seeing on that front?
Yeah, I think we're aware that if you go back to the 1970s and 1980s, the whole kind of house church movement and the first kind of wave of church planting, I think, happened. And we saw kind of like a new thing that God did. And it feels like the momentum of that slowed down in kind of the 90s and early part of this century. And I think we got more impacted probably by the American model of church that had really good leadership training and brought in some leadership principles that I think were really helpful. But it feels like in lots of ways the church started to stagnate at the same time as that. And I think certainly for me, I felt increasingly frustrated by that because it didn't feel like that was what we were praying for or longing for or carrying in our hearts. And then we went through the whole COVID experience, which was either really good for some people or a bit of a train wreck. And I think for a lot of people in leadership, a bit of a train wreck. I kind of feel like it maybe moved us on 5 years in one. That kind of churches that were struggling massively kind of tipped over the edge, and churches that were dreaming of something new, it kind of forced into something new. And I think over the last year or so, it feels like people have been saying, I want something that's authentic. I want something that is built around relationship and everyday life. I want something that has a cause to live for in a new way. And with that, it feels like people are reconnecting, and like a younger generation are starting to step forward and say, this is what we want. So it's kind of like the more performance-y model and professional, for want of a better phrase, maybe, model is kind of dropping away, because I think people felt maybe passengers rather than participants in it.
Yeah.
And I think now we're starting to see bubble up a kind of fresh enthusiasm and engagement, and a desire for a whole life engagement and discipleship, as opposed to an event-based model of or an experience of church.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like that people are hungering for a model where everybody gets to play, aren't they? I think it's a recovery in some ways. I think it feels like a mini reformation, you know, a recovery of the priesthood of all believers, that people are saying, I don't want to just watch a professional doing Christian ministry and leadership. I want to be in the thick of it. I want to be in the action, where the action is.
I think that's right. And I think for younger people, it feels like people have been searching for truth, and they're wanting to build relationship into areas that are offering truth. You know, we've had such a lot in terms of political correctness and you know, whether there is any right or wrong, or whether, you know, my truth is my truth, your truth is your truth, and there's no absolute truth. But it feels like in the younger generation, there's a desire for a path to follow, and principles to live by, and a commitment to make a difference. And I think that's something that meaningful church communities have the opportunity to invite people into. And it feels like we're seeing the first signs of that start to happen in the UK, and I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, it feels like there's a hunger for something smaller as well as the larger gatherings, isn't there? And I mean, certainly we've been experiencing that when having being led to start a small house church 18 months ago. And we were at a wedding on Monday, and I just ended up being surrounded by young people who are asking about, what is this new small thing that we're hearing about what you're doing? And they were all leaning into this conversation and asking us, you know, what we did and how is it validated as church? You know, if it only meets in a home, what's that about? And you don't even meet every Sunday. You know, so are you really a church? I was actually having to dig deep in relation to recognizing that actually this is the first 300 years of the church was only in homes and round tables. So it's not that new. It's a pretty old model, but we're seeing something of a recovery of interest and a passion for it.
But we are having to redefine church, aren't we, in that process, Phil? Because we have an expectation of church. Still, for most people think of church being a building or being somewhere that you go on a Sunday, as opposed to a shared life experience. And I think part of what you're saying is people want to belong and they want to be known. Yeah. And I think that is a shift that culture has created.
Yes.
And I think we're one of the places that offer the opportunity to be honest, authentic, real, share what's happening on the inside, yes, as well as meaningful friendship and relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that is a different form of church. But then when you read the book of Acts, you kind of like, oh, actually, that's what they were doing. And so I think it is a rediscovery of something. But you're right that in terms of even our language, how we explain that to people, it is amazing the number of people, because one of our expressions of church is based in homes and going really well, but they continually face the whole issue. People say, well, that isn't really church, is it? And
yes.
Like, well, it is. It's just different to what you were expecting.
Yes. There does seem to be a journey of having to revalidate the small, doesn't there?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I just wondered, in terms of, you know, this being known, you know, you can get information anywhere nowadays because we've got, you know, the World Wide Web, every bit of knowledge at the press of a finger. But that's not the same as knowing and being known. And I think that seems to be the hunger that most people are looking for, isn't it? I don't want to just know and get information. I can get that from podcasts, from teaching. There's some of the best teachers are available online, but I need to be in a community, in a family that knows my story, and where I can tell that story and know that others are going to know me. So yeah, it's quite a journey, isn't it? It's quite a transition.
I think that's right, Phil. And if you look statistically, you know, the stats on loneliness in the UK, what is it, 1 in 9 people
Yeah.
feel chronically lonely. And so that is the fact that on one level we're more connected than we've ever been before, but on another level we're less known than we've ever been before. And I think it's understanding the impact of that. And in communities, in families, we've seen so much brokenness and breaking down of relationships. And so people really, really are looking for somewhere where they can have a group of friendships and people they can trust.
Yeah.
I think we offer that, and that's a great opportunity. Like I think in lots of ways, we've been praying for revival and a significant move of God in this country. But if you look at other contexts where there's been revival, it's often come from societal breakdown, and that has been the trigger for revival. And you can look at the UK at the moment, kind of economically, politically, and we're in a mess. Actually, maybe that is God answering our prayers, because it's exposing our needs, and that then becomes fertile territory, doesn't it? You know, when Jesus sent out the 72, he looks at a crowd and he sees the brokenness in the crowd, and then says the harvest is there, it's ready. People who think they've got it all together are not receptive or open spiritually in the same way. And I think what we're seeing is probably God at work by His Spirit, breaking down our pride and our independence in our community. So then we can invite people into the answer, which is always Jesus.
That's a great summary. It's kind of recognizing our poverty before we can become wealthy again, isn't it? Before we can gain the spiritual wealth of the ages. And you have to recognize your emptiness to be able to be open to that. That's for sure.
That's right.
But it does feel like a lot of the mixture of millennials and Gen Z, the Zennials, I think, as some people are calling them, they seem to be looking for spiritual families. But I mean, one of the things that my wife and I have recognized is that we seem to have a lot of millennials leaning in and going, "We want to hang out with you," and we're going, "Really? You know, what? These two old duffers, you want to hang out with us?" So our little house group is a bunch of millennials and us grandparents, you know, and we're going, "How did this happen?" But there's this it's interesting, isn't it? There's this cross-generational hunger that is in people, and there's this shift from being sons to being fathers and spiritual mums and dads. And I mean, obviously, we're more than spiritual mums and dads. We're kind of spiritual. We are in the grandparenting zone, so we're way down the track. But we're seeing this hunger that is genuine, that is. And we're looking around from, you know, the people, we look over the shoulder and those people that mentored us are no longer there. And we're going, okay, well, we're it. This is a strange new landscape, isn't it? We were just commenting on this when we were talking a week ago. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think it's about understanding the seasons of life, isn't it? And how we change over the seasons of life. And I think for a lot of people in our generation, certainly speaking for myself, we grew up with parents who were not demonstrative by and large. And I think, you know, post the Second World War, I think people were quite stoic. And so they didn't demonstrate love in practical ways. And I think probably most of us struggled in terms of feeling loved by our dads. And a whole process that I think went on in the 80s, 90s was a kind of rediscovering father's love. And I think in a rediscovering father's love, we kind of grew up emotionally and spiritually into the people that God always intended us to be. Because I think there's something about a father that confers identity on a son, isn't it? That's part of the role of a father, I think, to speak value and worth. That's what happens to Jesus at his baptism. And again, just before the cross, you know, his dad speaks words of affirmation and encouragement. And if you've got a gap for that, then you seek validation in other arenas. And we've probably all got our stories of where we did that. When you come back home, like the prodigal coming home, you find a father's love, and that is revolutionary in terms of then finding your sense of identity and worth and being loved. And I think for us, probably that was a long journey to get to that point. And I think certainly for me, I'm suddenly realizing, oh, now there's another generation, and they need that from me. And I've had a couple of moments that I thought, oh, okay, it's your turn now to be the dad, rather than to be the son looking for affirmation from a dad. Yeah. And then thinking, well, actually, if you look at my age, that is the age group I'm now in. And so if I've rediscovered, and I know it's still a journey, but if I've rediscovered what my heavenly dad's love is like, now I need to be intentionally passing that on to other people. And I think it's funny, isn't it? You get older, but inside, in lots of ways, you feel the same. and so it's suddenly recognizing that actually there's probably a weight on our words now that we carry as a result of the journey we've lived with Jesus. And now it's a time to make that count. And I think if we have the privilege of being surrounded by younger people, which you do, you guys have always been good at connecting with a younger generation. So maybe it's no surprise that that's happening. But where that is happening, we get the opportunity to offer to be the spiritual mom and dads to folk. And I think with the breakdown of family in the UK and in the Western world, there's a need for people who can provide safety, but also can see potential in the next generation and can speak it out and share our lived out experience, because actually we've got treasure to pass on to the younger generation, and we can short circuit some of their learning if we can pass on what took us maybe 20 years, 40 years to learn. If we can pass that on, it will help the younger generation reach a place to be able to step out for God way beyond what we've been able to do. And that's what you want in terms of one generation passing on something to another, isn't it? I mean, I'd much rather be the Elijah to an Elisha that is able to do way, way beyond what I was able to do, because they're able to build on the foundation. That would be an amazing thing for us to be able to, not saying I'm Elijah, but that whole principle of one generation passing something on intentionally to the next generation and understanding the power of anointing and lived out wisdom, and then intentionally conferring that on the next generation or blessing the next generation with it is a great gift to be able to be a part of giving, isn't it?
That's a fantastic summary, Ian. I love that. But you're so right that we've taken a long time to learn how to be sons, and now we're suddenly having to pivot and say, okay, now we've got to be parents, spiritual parents.
Well, and as a part of that, Phil, we've got to get over being an orphaned generation and get over being spiritual orphans. We've got to opt out of that orphan mindset, because sometimes I can still slip back into an orphan mindset, and I have to intentionally guard against that, because I'm not going to be able to parent another generation spiritually if I'm still looking for my dad myself or living out of an orphaned kind of heartedness or mentality.
It's true. I think that what you're saying is that certainly I'm not sure whether you qualify as a boomer, Ian. You're probably a bit younger, certainly a bit younger than I am. But the boomer generation is, I know it gets criticised as causing a lot of the problems that the current generation are facing, but they have so much capital in it that they to give and to transfer. Relational capital, intellectual capital, spiritual capital, as well as any of the wealth capital. But all of those capitals are something I believe, that God is clearly calling our generation to say, okay, now it's time to get back to work, really, rather than fade away into retirement, to go back to work, to father and mother the fatherless in this generation.
And I think one of the principles you see in the Bible is people blessing their kids, don't you? Think about Israel blessing his kids at the end of his life. And I think in the Bible we see the power of conferring blessing on other people. And I think we've lost that in culture, haven't we? If anything, quite often we're quick to criticize and to dishonor leadership as opposed to recognize there is huge, huge power in blessing, putting ourselves under the blessing of God, but also conferring that on others. And what you're saying is the baby boomer generation actually are incredibly blessed. And so we've got tremendous ability to confer blessing on others, whether it's using our finances, using our accrued wisdom, using the fact that people are retiring younger and fitter than ever before. You might retire at 60. I've just turned 60. You might retire at 60 and have another 30 years, have another third of ministry. And if you take someone like Moses, his last third of ministry of life and ministry was his most effective third. And so maybe actually for a whole generation, this is going to be our most effective season. And rather than retirement mentality, we should have, I'm going to live off the benefit of my years of investment in the workplace. I'm now going to realize that. I'm going to cash it in if you want, but use it now to serve the kingdom of God. That would be amazing to do.
I love that, Ian. I mean, that basically feels to me like a godly vision for a generation, and the most effective and fruitful way of seeing both all the generations blessed. It is that it's calling the boomer generation or the baby boomers to be a blessing because they've been blessed, and that realignment of all of those capitals for the kingdom could absolutely be an incredible resource for revival in the nations.
Well, I think, Phil, most biblical characters are most fruitful in the latter years of their life rather than the former. So you get someone like Joseph, and he went through all of his years of preparation. Actually, his latter years was where he saw the fulfillment of it. You get the same with Moses. You get the same. Well, David went through a long preparation. At the very end, he undid a lot of it. But his latter years were the fruitful ones. And even when you look at Jesus, there was 30 years preparation for the 3 years of ministry. So the potential of accrued wisdom and the learning that you get through lifelong is a real gift to be able to pass on. And I think we need to rediscover. I think quite often we celebrate the young, which we ought to do. And I'm all for that. I'm all for releasing the next generation. Don't hear me wrong on it. But sometimes we devalue the older generation and the learned wisdom. And I think we can provide the safe places. That's why the role of spiritual mom and dad is so important, because we're providing the safety and the covering, hopefully, for the next generation to run hard after Jesus and be part of the new thing that God's doing.
Yeah. The key is being secure in what your role is, isn't it, in relation to that whole process? And, you're saying we need to release the next generation. There's a strong facilitation that needs to happen, but it has to be happening in a relationship that is genuinely two-way. That's a real prayer goal for us, I think, in this season.
I think that's right. It's a bit more like being Moses and Aaron and Hur up the mountain and Joshua fighting the battle on the ground, but the two being connected, because Joshua triumphs as much as Moses prayed. And when Moses gets tired and weary, Joshua starts to lose. But it's understanding that partnership, isn't it? And I think for a long time I've been thinking I'm the Joshua. Now I'm thinking I'm probably the Moses.
Yes.
And understanding that, and understanding my role is different. But exactly like you say, there's a partnership, because Joshua couldn't do it without Moses, and Moses couldn't do it without Joshua. Joshua had the energy and the passion and the fire of young people, but there was something in the depth of the relationship with God and the intimacy that Moses had learned.
There you go.
Enabled Joshua to achieve way beyond what he could have done in his own ability. And I think if we can form those kind of partnerships, I think we'll be amazed at what we see God do.
Amen. Just coming back to the fruitfulness of the latter years, the sociologists have observed that the most fruitful decade of a person's life is their 60s.
I'm sure there's a stat produced by...
There is a stat. I've already looked it up. The second most fruitful decade is your 70s, all supposing that you have sustained health and looked after yourself. And the third most fruitful decade is reportedly the 50s. So just as a note to the younger generation, pace yourselves, because you've got a lot of the journey ahead of you.
And it's good news for us, Phil, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. It's really good news. So, Ian, you went through a period of burnout. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, we've got two kids. We've now 22 and 20. Our youngest experienced a lot of issues that emerged in terms of mental well-being kind of 5-6 years ago. Was late diagnosed with autism and ADHD, dropped out of secondary school, was severely depressed, struggled with anxiety, suicidal. So we were leading a church whilst having massive stuff go on within our home that are enormous issues to process emotionally. And then in the midst of that, we went into COVID, which was not a fun time for anybody in leadership. And so for us, it was just huge pressure for a prolonged period of time. And under that, both of us started to crack, maybe not surprisingly. But that's quite a scary place to get to when you start to, and I can remember lying awake early in the morning thinking I could pack a suitcase and run away today. And I never think like that. And having moments where something would happen, and I'm not a natural crier, but I would I'd have triggers, and I would just be in tears, and I'd be sitting there thinking, this isn't me. And actually, that's a really scary place to be at.
Yeah. I touched a little bit into that in recent years after an accident, which really put me in touch with my mortality in a fresh way. And those moments of tears when you're thinking, hang on a minute, there's something I need to address here. I need to take notice.
It's when your emotional response to something is beyond the event or the issue. I mean, we know that in life, don't we? That we get triggers. If we've got unresolved stuff from our past and something lands on it, suddenly we get a massive reaction when actually it's quite a small thing. And that's one of the ways that we recognize, oh, there must be something beyond it. But I think when you're running out of gas, you get a similar thing, that your emotions are way more at the surface.
Yeah.
And you're much less, to me, I would say I'm normally, for good or for bad, quite a controlled person in terms of my emotions and my well-being. When you're in a moment that you're no longer in control, you can't hold it anymore, something's going wrong, and you're starting to go on what could be a very slippery slope unless you recognize it and do something about it.
So how did you find your way back from that, Ian? What was the path?
It's a good question, Phil. I think for me, I ended up sitting on a doorstep in Birmingham when I was moving my eldest uni accommodation, crying, thinking, this isn't a good place to be. And I thought, if I don't take radical action now, I'm going to be in trouble, because this isn't me at all. So I thought about it on my drive back from Birmingham. When I got home the next day, I rang our chair of trustees and said, I'm cracking and I need to take some time out. And they were great, actually. And I proposed that I took 3 months out, and they signed off on that virtually immediately. So I think I had 2 weeks lead time to it to try and set up things the best I could. But I took radical action quickly to create some space for myself. And I think that was really, really important. And then I put 2 things in place, or people helped me put 2 things in place. One was I asked someone if they would meet regularly with me and be a place that I could offload and be accountable for what was happening internally for me. And that was someone that was experienced in terms of pastoral care and wellness, mental and emotional wellness. And that provided a safe space to be able to download exactly what was happening and get some advice into it. Because obviously I had a build-up of emotional stuff inside that I hadn't been able to process. And it gave me space, but a safe place to be able to unburden that. And then one of the things we've done as a staff team at Restore is we kind of have a staff development program, but it looks at wellness, and we do that every year to monitor where we're at, and then we look at coaching for the different members of the team on different issues. And so I was instantly put in what's called an ego reconstruction program that was coaching me through what you do when you've reached a point of burnout.
Yeah.
And so looking at what the factors were that were draining life from me, how I could offload some of those, and how I could rediscover some of the things that would replenish or regain life and wellness for me. And then the other thing I did was I wrote a list of all the people I would like to spend some time with in terms of friends or places I'd like to go and visit. That would be life-giving, and then I use the time to have to rest, but also to spend time with people that I just enjoyed being with for no other reason than I enjoyed their company. So not because I was their pastor or their leader, simply because they were friends. And I have to say, because when I was starting to crack, if you'd said to me, "Who are your friends?" I wouldn't have been able to answer that, because I was paddling like crazy, just trying to keep my head above the water. Actually, when I stopped and I wrote a list, I had loads of friends. I just hadn't invested in them. And so over that time, I reconnected with some key people, and it kind of balanced out my wellness. Now, I would say, Phil, it's probably taken me 2 years to recover from that. And I would say the last 6 months, I've started to feel fully myself again, and like I've got energy. So it's been it was 3 months of radical, ruthless life changes to recognize I was going over the edge, and then it's been another 18 months of applying fresh principles to gradually replenish emotional capacity, because there's not a quick fix for burnout. It's a long pathway back, and some people don't recover from it. And so don't underestimate, I guess, the impact of it, and don't take lightly how long the process of recovery might take. But it's well worth investing that time well, because it has the potential to totally change and transform you.
Yes, that's such a helpful story, Ian, and testimony. We went through a reflective period, probably a similar age period, and when we discovered Pete Scazzero and the emotionally healthy spirituality material that he produces so wonderfully. Really recommend that to our listeners, emotionally healthy spirituality. But his emphasis on the Sabbath rhythms was such a revelation for me. It felt like he is the missing piece of church that we have not valued, and we've not invested in intentionally, and or recognized as, the fourth commandment, above, do not commit adultery, do not kill. It's up there, and yet we've consigned it as an Old Testament commandment that is a law that. So I think the church gave up on Sabbath quite a long time ago, and we've probably been part of that generation that just about survived, but quite a few who haven't, who we know probably as amongst our peers, who didn't find the point of recovery and the point of stopping and reviewing and understanding that Sabbath is God's gift to our mental and emotional and physical health, and as well as our spiritual health. And in all of those matters, that's been something which we've had to discover and rediscover and revalue, definitely. So how you've managed to track that journey is such an encouragement to see, because as a friend and watching how you've pivoted and learned from every moment, I think that's part of your wisdom that you have got to invest in the next generation. Definitely, you've learned from the hard knocks and from the blind spots of the culture that we grew up in.
But I think you're right, Phil, that we've lost the principle of rest, and society's sick because we don't know how to turn off. And I think one of the things that we have to offer into contemporary society is a different pattern for living, and bringing godly wisdom into that. And Sabbath principle is one of those. I think just a really good lifestyle pattern of rest. And understanding as well, I think, the importance of processing our journey. I think because the whole point of Sabbath, isn't it, is a day to rest, but it's a day to reflect as well. And I think probably every week we've got some stuff that we need to bring before God and maybe repent of, maybe get washed clean from, maybe reevaluate life because of. And if we don't value that, we'll end up accumulating a whole load of stuff that is unprocessed.
Yes.
And eventually that has the power to take you out. And I think the other thing I've learned, Phil, is don't allow yourself to get isolated. And I think church leadership and ministry can be really isolating. They're complicated roles because you end up with different layers in all of your relationships.
Yes.
Is this person my friend, or are they relating to me because I'm a church leader? Have I got a role that I need to play? Like, relationships are highly complicated, and if we don't intentionally seek out friendships and people we can be honest and real with, we leave ourselves incredibly vulnerable. And I think if you're watching this and you are feeling lonely or isolated, I would say reach out to somebody, try and connect to someone, because they become our lifelines. And I wouldn't have made it through without a good set of friends. And it's made me reprioritize the value of friendships and people I can genuinely be Ian to, not a title or a leader or anything. People that are genuinely just my friends who want to journey and do life with me.
Yeah, so good. That need to audit what's going on in our lives in seasons, and how where's our tank? How is our energy levels? What are our capacities? In all sorts of dimensions. We need to learn that life is not go, go, go. It has to be a rhythm of, what is it, Pete? How does Pete summarize it? Stop, rest, delight, and contemplate. And if we don't do all four of those, then we're not really entering into a Sabbath rhythm. But I do like the delight bit. But like you say, working out and recognizing that the loneliness of leadership is actually a very key element to that, and being intentional about friendship. I think that's a very good, strong takeaway.
It is, and being accountable making yourself accountable to someone else. I think, like, some people are wired well in terms of emotional wellness, and they understand well where they're at in terms of their tank and things. Some of us aren't so well wired with that. If you're not so well wired with that, make sure you make friends with someone who will ask you some of those difficult questions.
Yeah.
Because that's that's a safety net for us, isn't it? And to have some kind of anchor points in terms of key relationships is life-changing, I think.
Absolutely. It's the creative people, the people that give you energy, isn't it? The friends that actually, I think at one point, Julie and I sat down and made a list, like you, of, what gives us energy and what drains our energy. And we're not going to do any of these things on our day off, so we agreed we'd never shop on our day off. We don't, neither of us particularly like shopping. We wouldn't talk about money. We wouldn't even talk about the kids, even though that's a great, we love them, but we're not going to talk about them on our day off. And we limit certain things that we would do. And we became quite strict about the boundaries in terms of that rest time. But it was so helpful for us. And just to engage with people who gave us energy was just, like you say, so life-giving and pivotal for us. So, yeah, gosh, we've covered some ground today. Anything else, Ian, that you want to share as you're watching what God's doing in the realm of discipleship and mission? What's resonating with you at the moment? Any last words on that front?
I think the thing that I've been most challenged by is whether I am living out what I believe in as well. Because we talked about being mothers and fathers, and sometimes I think, particularly in the West, we can think, well, now I write the book that gives my life story, and then I pass it on to other people. But I think if we take a biblical approach to discipleship, it was much more an apprenticeship. And I want to keep living consciously what I want to see reproduced in other people. And so I've been evaluating a lot, where am I sharing my faith with people who don't yet know Jesus?
Yeah.
And I've consciously, over the last 18 months, I've got 5 people that I'm praying for most days that don't know Jesus yet, and that I'm consciously building friendship and relationship with.
Brilliant.
And I've been reevaluating what success looks like, because I think quite often in church and in discipleship we've celebrated the wrong things, because Jesus didn't seem to worry about attendance, he didn't seem to worry about the bank balance, and he didn't seem to worry about buildings. And we seem to worry about all 3 of those and measure them. Jesus seemed to worry more about dealing with the deep issues in people's lives and being prepared to challenge and rock their world sometimes, even if they didn't like it, but also equipping people to be sent on mission. And I think a long time ago, I felt like God said to me, Ian, you're not going to be judged in terms of the number of people you've put on seats. You're going to be judged in terms of the number of people you sent. And so I'm thinking a lot more, how are we equipping people to send them to live a Jesus-style lifestyle? And how am I intentionally living that as I get older as well? That's got lots of provocation for me at the moment, because it means I have to make different choices. It means that I'm not going to do my admin and my management stuff before I do the relational and spending time with people who don't know Jesus yet, or early stage discipleship. Yeah. And I'm having to rewire to do that. But I think if that's what I'm looking to reproduce in people, then I need to be living that way as well. And so I think that's one of the last things I would say to anybody watching this. Actually, are we living a lifestyle that looks like Jesus? Because we'll reproduce not what we say, but who we are. And so maybe there's some things for this next season in life I need to be reorientating so that I pass on the right things to people.
That's great. Someone once used the phrase to me, you need to get to the place where you're enjoying seeing your fruit grow on other people's trees.
Yeah.
And I love that image, looking at, and I look around and I think, who are the people where I know I've invested and they're investing, and I'm seeing that fruit in the next generation. Those are the things I want to celebrate and count as successes. So Julie and I, sometimes we sit down and we count not just our blessings, but the blessings of those people who pass through our lives. And it's a different perspective, isn't it? It changes your way of looking at what you're doing.
But that's right, Phil. It's understanding that our legacy is what we invest in people, isn't it? And if you invest intentionally in people and they flourish, then that's how they're going to produce fruits, and that is our fruit growing on other people's trees, isn't it? And at the end of the day, people aren't going to remember titles or what we've built in terms of organizations. It's that impact into people's lives, and it's valuing that and being conscious that we intentionally invest in that, because that's the legacy really that makes a difference.
Absolutely. Who we were as people, not just what our work was. Yeah. Well, that's fabulous. Thank you so much, Ian, for your time, and just to be able to talk with you and for you to tell your story so honestly is just a treasure trove. So thank you very much. And I just want to say to our listeners, if you valued this show, do remember to hit subscribe and join the mailing list for Reach London. The address is in the notes. And if you wish to make a gift or subscribe to Reach, that will enable us to continue to make discipleship and missional resources for the church across London, just like this conversation, but in many other spaces as well. So thank you, Ian, and God bless you, mate. We'll look forward to speaking to you in another environment very soon.
Thank you, Phil. Always good to chat to you.
God bless you, mate.